We will now move on to our panel discussion. I'd like to call Anuja Malhotra, A3's Policy Manager at the Center for Policy Design, to get the session started.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's quite fitting that this panel discussion follows the very inspiring lecture that we just heard. And I'm just going to borrow from Pradeep and say that when we were thinking about putting together this very high-powered panel, our idea was to talk about what do we do next, where can we go from here, what are the kind of challenges that we are facing related to restoration, and what is the role that different stakeholders have in that. And so, our panel together brings today representation from the government that, of course, designs and implements large-scale land management in India. A very prominent civil society actor who works deeply with local communities, and a private sector climate strategy professional who explores the world of sustainability finance, and right before this panel told me that only talk to me about that, I'm not a biodiversity expert. So just to say that it's a diverse panel which is getting moderated by an equally high-powered person who perhaps needs no introduction, especially in this room, but it is still my very great pleasure in introducing Ms. Rohini Nilekani, chairperson of the Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies. She is also the co-founder and director of EkStep, a national non-profit organization that looks at education. She's also the founder and former chairperson of Arghyam, a foundation that she set up in 2001 for sustainable water and sanitation. In 2017, she was inducted as a foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Science. She's also been a member of the Board of Science Gallery, Bengaluru, at the advisory board of the Wellbeing Project since 2019, and the Dakshin Foundation since 2021. Rohini has been named the most generous woman in India for the third consecutive time in 2022 by the India Philanthropy Report. In 2017, she signed the Giving Pledge with her husband Nandan Nilekani, which commits half their wealth to philanthropic causes. She is one of A3's biggest supporters, giving generously of her time as one of our board of trustees, as well as her philanthropic support. Rohini, may I ask you to please join us on the stage as I introduce the other panel members, and thank you. I'll now invite the other panelists for our panel discussion today. I'll start with Dr. Nanita Varghese from Keystone Foundation and the Nilgiri Natural History Society. Her interests are in conservation, specifically on sustainable use, non-timber forest products, and long-term population dynamics of harvested species, human-wildlife interaction, invasive plants, and endangered trees. Overall, her work looks at the factors that mediate the relationship between people and nature, specifically how the goals of conservation and development can be harmonized. Anita leads the biodiversity team at Keystone, which undertakes implementation and action research projects on human-wildlife interactions, restoration, and climate change. She is also the chair of the Western Ghats Plant Specialist Groups. Anita, may I request you to please join us on the stage, and the audience to please welcome her with a round of applause. I will move on to Ms. Namita Vikas, who is the founder and managing director of Octus ESG. Namita Vikas is an award-winning senior business leader, and she's an ex-banker with over 33 years of diverse experience in sectors across banking, finance, and technology. She's an influential voice in sustainable finance and climate transition globally. She's held a leadership position with India's fourth largest private bank, where she was instrumental in launching several first-to-market green and sustainable wholesale and retail banking products, including India's maiden green bond. She's raised over $1 billion in green capital from marquee global DFIs, and also incubated multiple ventures in climate technology, providing her with invaluable hands-on experience in building climate-ready and sustainable businesses. She is the founder of Octus ESG, which is a global sustainable finance and climate transition global advisory firm. And she's steered multiple global projects awarded by UN agencies, international governments, MDBs, and so on. Namita, may I please request you to join us on the stage? Dr. Pushpendra Rana, who is an Indian Forest Services officer, currently at the Himachal Pradesh government as the PCCF. He's an interdisciplinary social scientist with a unique niche in integrating social and ecological theory, data, and advanced geospatial machine learning and impact evaluation methods to address environmental sustainability challenges. He has proven project development and management skills in natural resource management with over a decade of experience as a forest practitioner. His research focuses on the study of coupled human-forest interactions, policy evaluation, operationalization of the notion of geographic space in analytical problems. His previous work includes impact evaluation of forest certifications in Indonesia, Gabon, Brazil, and exploration of the social impacts of the REDD+, which is the reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation programs in Indonesia and Zambia. He has extensive research experience using social and ecological data, and he looks at human-forest interactions, and now has over 15 years of field experience with the Indian Forest Services. Dr. Rana, may I please invite you to the stage, and I'll request the audience to welcome all the panelists. Rohini, over to you.
Very good, Namaskara. I hope you're all doing well in this warm, safe environment. Outside it's really terrible, but that's the price we pay. I have a great panel here. I have to admit that for various miscommunication reasons, we haven't been able to do a little discussion beforehand, so we're all going to wing it together, the audience and us. But because it's such an expert panel, I'm not worried at all. After listening to Pradeep, that was a fabulous talk, thank you, I don't know where he is. But coming on the heels of that, and just the possibility, so much possibility and potential for eco-restoration in India. I don't know if any of you, were you at the ERA? So we just had a 3-day Ecological Restoration Alliance meeting, and some of you were there. I just got a brief from one of my colleagues. I believe it went well. There were more than 300 people there, and it aims to create a really safe network where people can experiment, talk about success, failure, the science of restoration, and much more. I hope it becomes a really wonderful space for restoration across all our different ecospheres. So Anita, since you're fresh from there, why don't you tell the audience what is the ERA, why is it important to what we want to discuss today, and what did you learn in these 3 days?
Thank you so much, Rohini. I think that's a great start because, so one of the exciting things about being in India today and working as an ecologist in India today is that everyone's on board with ecological restoration, right? So it's something that you don't have to convince anybody about. Everybody's on board. And there's almost, there's more than, listening to Pradeep, I understand that there's more than 3 decades. I thought there was only 3 decades of work on it, but at least, there's several years of work, and that's essentially what an alliance like the Ecological Restoration Alliance brings together. It brought together all of these practitioners, scientists, biologists, people who've been working on native ecosystems. We agreed to meet and to bring our knowledge resources, our experiences together. Over the years, over the past 4 years, we've about 300 plus members. We have this annual conference. And what I really like about the annual conference, of course, there's the stalwarts who have these decades of experience, but there's a lot of young people, there's a lot of young energy in the room saying, what can we do, how can we be part of it. And one of the things, I think it's all right if I share this, but one of the things we also analyzed this time is one of the main actors that was missing in the alliance was the government. And we are asking ourselves those hard questions that where did we, how could we make this happen and what would we? But having said that, I also think one of the things that on this conservation journey, I see it as another conservation journey. And ecological restoration has come forward and it's part of everybody's agenda. And I feel a little sad that we're again missing out something that we thought we had missed out earlier, which was communities. We started to do conservation, we started to do inclusive conservation to include communities. And I still think on this road of restoration, that's something we're still missing, and we need to work harder on bringing that. So these are some of my opening comments.
I'll just do a quick follow-up on that community angle. How would you bring, Keystone has been doing this for what, 4 decades now? Trying to work with local communities, indigenous communities, and very much including them. What is the challenge with including communities? And also, to be very honest, generation by generation, are they losing? Because now they are a part of modern education systems which don't give any respect for their earlier knowledge. Is it harder and harder to, we can't romanticize that. So just a couple of words on how do you really include community properly? What is your experience?
So I also believe that, so when I look at the young people in the Ecological Restoration Alliance, they are young people out of modern education, right? And there's something that communities from educated or from schools are talking that we've lost a connection. We've lost a connection with lands, with forests, with natural areas. So there is this search. So I think a larger community is looking for that. For those traditional knowledge holders and communities that had that stewardship, there's a history of alienation that's happened. So many a times when you ask to be part of this, they say, but that doesn't even belong to us. That forest doesn't belong to us. So what are we going to do there? So I think we have to have a road to reconciliation before we start on the road to restoration. So this was my thoughts.
Thank you, very well said. You said that the government, it's hard sometimes in things, civil society sometimes leaves out government, either on purpose or unintentionally. So, Mr. Rana, how is the state, and especially the forest department, the right and natural ally of both the bazaar and the samaj in ecological restoration? Or do you think the state and the forest department feels like it has slightly more responsibility and expertise in doing so?
So, thank you so much for inviting here. I think I'm really privileged. So, thank you for asking government to join, because I'm the only government officer here, and my voice should not...
I'm sure there are more.
A couple of more. Please don't record my statements. So, I think government needs support. And I think as an insider and spend a lot of time outside the government, I can tell that we lack expertise, not only in social mobilization, but also in doing the restoration as a practice, taking that to a ground. So one paper that was just accepted today, it's coming up, maybe that is a learning. For Indian context, what we have seen is foresters are doing a different, for us restoration is just a sort of a small technique from production forestry, where we have high density trees, some species that we know how to grow in nurseries, and then plant in an old traditional way that we're doing for last so many decades and centuries. That is a tree. So whatever you tell me, we name it different schemes, whether it's carbon credits or rejuvenation of degraded landscapes, or whatever scheme you say. In Himachal, we have 40 plus schemes. But the 90% of the budget is going for what I described, the tree planting. So definitely forest department lacks expertise in doing the ecological restoration that Pradeep ji was mentioning. And we need support from the local society, we need support from the private sector. And somehow, for example, that's in my home state, 68% of the land is owned or managed by forest department, 68% of the entire landscape. And that 68% of the land is devoid of any kind of technological innovation. We're talking about unicorns, we're talking about a lot of stuff happening around. $300 billion are being spent annually on AI, right? But how much money for $1 billion, I think we're talking about carbon credits. It's $1 billion. It was $2 billion, now after backlash, it's like $1 billion. So there's not enough innovation happening in a lot of landscape, and there lies the scope for future restoration in a scientific and productive manner.
So follow up to that. If the goal is maximum ecological restoration of India's biodiversity, and if nobody is allowed to do any social media or anything to whatever the panel says, if you had your way, what were the two things, either resources, talent, whatever, that you would like to bring into the government, into the forest department, to enable this goal of maximizing India's biodiversity restoration?
I think reducing regulation. So
Reducing regulation.
So agroforestry, for example, there were international studies. In India, there's a lot of potential for agroforestry,
Yes.
linking with carbon storage and carbon credits. But somehow our we have so many regulations and so many controls. So we have strangulated private sector. We have not allowed, we don't allow any third party or second party or third party to enter forests.
Yes.
It's our domain, it's our fiefdom. We don't allow anyone. That is wrong. Somehow we need to change that. We need to start that process. It will start from top up. I'm just an individual in government. Government is an entire bureaucratic structure. And we need support from external actors also to make government understand that now time has changed.
Yes.
And to open up, right? Because of the challenges, climate change and so many biodiversity loss, so many things are happening. And we cannot stick with our old practices.
Thank you. आपके मुंह में घी शक्कर. To come to no. Please, everybody respect that. You're going to get the most interesting answers if they feel that they are in a safe and trusted space. To come to the bazaar, there is a lot of understanding now that even for economic growth, you're going to need to restore and preserve our biodiversity. That's where all the next innovations are going to come from, and you're going to stem the drainage of economic value if we can do this. There are a lot of market mechanisms out there. $30 billion now recently supposedly coming for this. I don't know exactly how yet. Nobody seems to know how. From your experience, what are the 2 or 3 things, and let's keep it to India, what are the 2 or 3 things that the market sector can do effectively to do? The market loves these 3 words: speed, scale, and sustainability. So how can the market help to do this? And your experience too.
Yes, thank you for that question.
You want to hold the mic closer?
I think one of the things that, it's on. I think one of the things that, to answer your question, we have to first understand, Avik mentioned earlier that there is a process to restoration. And I started thinking that there is also a financial process to deploying capital to restoration, right? So what is this financial process? And it's very important to understand this financial process. So if you see any kind of sector that has developed and matured to get the scalability, it stands on a financial stack, and it's really my favorite response. If you look at the renewable energy sector, how did it really go to that maturity? It first started with grants and philanthropic capital to the sector, to the smaller SME kind of models, technology to come in. Then on top of that came the subsidies. So when solar pumps started being successful, subsidies from the governments came, and that gave some kind of strength to the sector to be able to mobilize some capital. On top of that stack, on top of that layer, sat the impact investors, the the guarantee providers, the concessional finance providers. Then that attracted the equity players, and then came the equity players. And after the equity started being infused into private companies, then came the lenders, the banks, the big guys, right, who gave like millions of dollars that they are talking about, right? So I think for adaptation, one of the foremost important thing from a lender's perspective is to understand the risk-return models, because lenders only think about risk and return. One. Two, from the borrower's perspective, the borrower essentially needs to speak the lender's language. So we work in the space where we ready the borrowers to be able to talk to the lenders and get the finance. So there's this bridge that is missing. So at one level, there are billions of dollars that are available, and on another level, there are many projects that are available. From a lender's standpoint, it's very important to understand that in adaptation projects, the lender's horizon is 3 to 5 years. I mean, 3 years, project planning, construction, make the money and then exit, right? In an adaptation project, we're talking about 10 to 15 years. The cash flows are going to be generated only after maybe a long period, and bankers don't have that appetite. So there's an appetite mismatch here, and therefore that needs to be solved for. So where does the public sector come in? Where does the private sector? See, today, 94% of the financing is all coming from the government, correct? So what is the incentive for the private sector to come in to be able to finance these projects? And from a CSR lens, there could be capital flowing, but that's what, 29,000 crores? That's
Very
nothing.
little, peanuts, yeah.
Against $853 billion that India requires for adaptation, right? So how do we then bridge this gap from the borrower and the lender's lens? I think that is important. And then do the right kind of subsidies help? So we have subsidies that are harming adaptation or agriculture today. For example, right, pesticides and fertilizer subsidies. So there are countries like Switzerland or Kazakhstan who are coming up with subsidies for sustainable agriculture.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that the response that we are looking for?
Right.
Or are we looking for concessional finance to walk in such a way where public sector says that we would only come in with concessional finance, which gives the comfort to the private sector, who can then bring in the billions of dollars that are required. Another example I want to give you, we are working with a large public sector bank, I can't name it, to work on their adaptation finance framework. Now, when you talk about adaptation finance framework, for the bank to understand what does adaptation mean. So we said, okay, we would need to scan your portfolio to understand whether you have lent to sectors which fall under adaptation. They said, no, we have never lent to. I said, impossible, because priority sector lending has about direct, indirect agriculture lending. So you have to have. So we started combing through their portfolio and looking at the assets. And now there is bund development, but they just tag it as agriculture. So there's no asset tagging that is happening, which is fundamental. So financial systems today are not really catering to these kind of measures that are required to be taken into consideration. Natural capital.
Valuing natural capital.
Absolutely. And you know what? There are natural capital accounting standards, but that's not really mainstream, right?
Yes.
I mean, today we have regulators asking about climate-related financial risks, which is a good move in the right direction. Data is a big challenge. So even if adaptation finance or finance towards biodiversity or conservation or wetland preservation is required to be done, the data is not credible. Accessibility to data is a big challenge. So how do then financial institutions take that decision? So like I said, it's action from the borrower as well as from the lender.
Yeah, but Namita, because I suspect there won't be that many market experts in the room as well. Just give us in simple language, how will markets find value in biodiversity regeneration? We can see the links, but how will the market see that link? Where will you put it on your books? And we know about carbon credits, but I'm thinking less about carbon than about biodiversity in this case of our panel. So can you think through, suppose you had a way to completely redesign the financial systems of the world.
So we need to have in budgetary allocations first, at the first level, we need to have something as a adaptation measure.
Okay.
One. Two is we need a taxonomy. I mean, today when we say adaptation,
Right.
the financial services sector doesn't understand what it means. So every institution looks at it from its own perspective. So we need a unified standard to measure. That's the next part. Like you spoke about taxonomy. Somebody spoke about taxonomy, right? We need an adaptation taxonomy today to be looked at. And I'll give you a simple example. We need financial structuring that really caters to impact. And not just risk return, it's risk return impact.
Yes.
If I may give you an example, this is something that I have done as a practitioner. So, in the run of Kutch, there are about 50,000 women who are making salt. And they work from September to April in 52 degrees centigrade, making salt, drawing brine from the ground using diesel. They borrow for that diesel, because they are not credit worthy, they borrow for that diesel upwards of 36 to 100% rate of interest. They are in this indebtedness cycle all the time, right? So we walked in and we looked at how we could move them from diesel to solar pumps, worked with a local bank to provide a guarantee, a kind of a comfort, for mainstream bank to give them loans. 1 lakh 20 was the pump, and the loans came in. We worked on a financial structure where we put in interest subvention, we put in a guarantee, and we put in a small capacity building grant for the NGO who was working there to be able to do the measurement matrix, so on and so forth. And where their incomes were about 325,000 rupees after paying their debts, their incomes went up to about 75,000 rupees.
Okay.
Right? It's not just about livelihood. It was also about bringing in financial structures. Now, if you take this and emulate this within the agriculture sector, or given the agrarian nature of Indian economy, other countries, it's replicable. So we have to also look at replicability. We have to look at the scalability. And how do you create market mechanisms to be able to get more and more financiers?
Yeah.
So just a last point, I know it's 5 minutes to go. Just a last point here. Again, I'm going back to the renewable energy sector. So I was involved in issuing the first ever green bond in India. Now, that issuance of the green bond was, please don't put this on social media, this was not for the love of green. It was because the RBI had given some tax exemption to infrastructure sector for issuing bonds. And we were smart enough to say, okay, this is the opportunity, and let's look at a green bond. And we had the risk return model, and therefore we were able to do it. So I think it's
So you need to align the incentives better.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just to clarify with the timekeeper, is it 5 minutes to the end of our panel? Yeah? I thought you were just beginning. But I know there's a 10-minute interaction with the audience. So, okay, if it's 5 minutes up, we can't do much more than this. I think it's very clear. Okay, so in the government, it clearly needs a policy change, and also you need much more partnering with both the markets and civil society. I think you are saying that we need much better data and a way to define standards so that the markets can step in. Civil society, I'm sorry, you have to represent all of civil society on this. What do you want from government and markets? What will make it better, easier? Because nobody can do this alone. None of us know much how we think we are the experts in this. No sector can go it alone. What should they do so that civil society can do its job better? There's 2 minutes left.
So I think clearly with the government, that's a clear ask, because that's something, I think we have to look at models that are co-managed, where we have much more collaboration and, everyone has to come halfway. So that's a little bit more clearer. And I think from the financial models, I think there's definitely a need for, the same kind of subsidies that are given for agriculture, a pool that is for natural restoration, and where communities can be drawing, just like the Manrega model that exists for all other kinds of works. Can we have models like that for restoring India's natural habitats? That could be things. But essentially what I also want to say, either to the government or to the finance sector, is that it takes time. I'm sorry, I think ecological restoration takes time, and that's what we've learned over 30 years. And there's no, we can do tree planting.
Yeah, but
we
what
need
do you
to-
do? What do you do when there's no time left? We have this decade is the most critical decade in human history that we know of. We don't have time. I know NCF took 20 years to do the Valparai thing, and my God, what a wonderful thing it is. We don't have 20 years, so I feel the urgency extremely. Last point, you have to say it in one sentence each. If you don't have time, how do you do it?
Well, then you stop doing some of the things that you're doing, which reduces your time.
Don't do the wrong things. How do you save time?
I think strengthen the regulation.
Strengthen the regulation.
Reduce the regulation.
Reduce the regulation. I'd like to have at least 2 or 3 questions. It won't be good without having something from the audience, even if you don't. Can we have the lights up, please, in the house? At least 2 questions, otherwise it doesn't feel like a good panel. And while you get the lights up, we've started a restoration project in the Nilgiris. I can say that, I don't know if, I hope the science is right, because we're doing it with some of the best restoration experts. I can only tell you as a lay person, not from government, not from anything, just the sheer joy of being able to take a small piece of land, inch by inch, and see it return to something that it should be. There is no joy like it, I think, in the whole world. So if all of us can do a little bit, we can start even with a little pot, I think, moving on to acres and thousands of acres. 2 quick questions from the audience. Okay, please go ahead. Just shout, because I don't know where the mics are. Vinay. It should be a question, though.
Yeah. So the point is, how important do you think are standards really for biodiversity? Because we have examples from the carbon markets.
Yes.
There have been multiple iterations of standards, but still we have had incredible greenwashing around that, right? Now, the point that you made, that we don't have a lot of time. Creating standards for biodiversity across different habitats is a challenge. So, how do you think about that?
Got it. Thank you. We'll take 2 more questions and then everyone will answer very quickly. Anybody? There, somebody? Yeah. Can you just right next to you?
This is for Mr. Rana. Mr. Rana, I have been sort of going to Nepal for more than 2 decades. And one has seen significant amount of, that's the impression that one has got, significant amount of afforestation through their community afforestation program. And, you know, that seems to be working. And forest produce also goes into the community. What do you think that they've been doing right, or has it been working? This is just a layman observation.
What's gone right? What's gone wrong? One last question and then the panel will respond.
Hi, my name is Kaveri Kargupta. I have a quick question for all of you. I just heard everybody talking about all the positive things. But one thing that comes to my mind as an ecologist for over 30 years, that what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of corruption. And how do you address the corruption in order to do anything good for the society?
All right,
Especially
that's a very
restoration.
easy question to answer. No, yeah, corruption and everything, but just final thoughts, really. No, not on corruption. You had a direct question.
Maybe that question was answered, was directed to me, government. So in one of my study I found, I think that became a highlight also, that India will lose around $9 billion by 2030 if we continue with, if the departments continue with the same practice of plantations. 50% is going to places where trees are already existing, cannot grow because of biophysical barriers. And next 50%, God knows, survival is poor. So the problem is, you have to somehow, individuals cannot make a difference. You need to think about how we can change the entire system. And that's a difficult question because I don't know, because it's corruption is, I think, is a system level cultural, social acceptance. We all are involved in some ways, right? Promote some time of these corrupt behaviors. So we need to think as a society that how we can curb, because for me it's a system problem. It's not an individual or one sector kind of a problem.
There's a question to you about what's being done right in Nepal, and from there what you have learned.
I think Nepal has a history of grassroots movements. There are very good their political ideologies, and the local user groups were given more rights on forests. So there was a sharing of ownership on forests with local communities in a more realistic way. In India, that part is missing. We still want to hold our land, the forest department, and I think I think there was one question in panels that it is for development. It is easy for government to divert forest land if forest department is holding it, other than if communities are holding it. It's easy for large-scale infrastructure projects to come up if government is the owner of the land. Sorry, it was.
Quickly, if you can address a lot of technology today, satellite technology, imaging, can really help us figure out quickly to increase the correction cycle very quickly. Any thoughts on technology and support for technology through markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of technology, but we need technology that is, see, with technology, it keeps upgrading. So when you look at technology, we need something that is, that can be financeable. So I'm coming from the finance lens, right? So for example, we are all struggling about physical risk data. So floods related, sea level rises, temperature, all that data is sitting with ISRO. But that's not accessible to the other finance sector. And I was amazed when they made that presentation, and I said, they all have it. But that interaction is important. I wanted to take that question on corruption. I wouldn't call it corruption, I'll call it poor governance and standardization. I think it's very important to look at carbon markets. One of the reasons why the carbon markets are not working the way they need to work is because their nature is voluntary. Now, of course, governments are coming up with own carbon markets. The EU CBAM is hitting everybody left, right, and center because the cost of the customer is going up. But I think most importantly, standards are required to create a level playing field. And when we come to finance, because we are operating within a highly regulated sector, if there is no standardization, then there is ambiguity in terms of what I am financing. And as a lender, there is always this fear of mislabeling when it comes to reporting to the regulator. And the regulator may just fine you for doing something that is not as per the norm. And therefore, standardization is important. Standardization also leads to measurement. So data and measurement. So I think these are very important factors from at least finance perspective. Thanks.
Thank you. Last word.
So I think the question on biodiversity startups, I think, the whole question of standardization, if I may say, but for biodiversity, just like time, space, site-specific experiments, are also important. So that's a really big start. And then for somebody like you, I'd say, come join the Ecological Restoration Alliance, because that's where a lot of learning can happen. So these are my last words.
Thank you. We've run out of time without going into any depth with the expertise of the panel. I'm so sorry that the time went by so quickly. I'll just say that, as you can see, Samaj Sarkar Bazaar talked the same goals but with very different language. We need some kind of translation mechanisms so that each sector can work to do what it does best with this unified but not uniform goal in mind. We don't have time. Together, we have to restore India's biodiversity together with all the sectors. Thank you to Atri, thank you for the panel, and thank you to the audience.
May I request all of you to please stay back? Yeah. Just stay back. We have a book launch, and then we can take a picture. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rohini, for that energy that you bring, and to all the panel members for making it. I don't know. I wasn't timing it. It was half an hour. Moving on, unfortunately, I think everybody in the room I owe an apology to for cutting this short, but you can catch all the panelists later during tea and so on, and I'm sure they'll be happy to interact on more questions. Moving on, it is my privilege to introduce A-Tree's latest knowledge product, if I may say so, a culmination of years of work in ecosystem restoration across India. We've been doing it even before some of the, like we said, the language and the understanding of it was there, but it's been happening for a long time. This document serves as a reflection of our journey. It's a synthesis of experiences and a framework that can guide future restoration efforts. I think the idea for having such a knowledge product took shape earlier this year in January when Jaya Peter, who heads communications at A-Tree, organized a restoration adda. And in that discussion, it became clear that while, of course, A-Tree has a wealth of ongoing work and knowledge spanning programs and sub-programs and projects, we hadn't really brought that information together or documented it in a way that we'd like. We realized that there was a need for a collective framework to capture, align, and share some of the diverse perspectives and learnings from our work. Then we had another nudge that came in from Rohini, who was also excited by the idea. And so we spent the entire year almost thinking about how we can create such a document. It has been a very collaborative and deeply introspective process. We had countless discussions with fellows and program teams, long debates, often about fundamental questions such as what is degradation, what does restoration mean, who are you restoring for, what do you restore for, and so on. I remember vividly that Dr. Ganesan said in one of the meetings that 20 years ago, if you would have asked some of these questions, I would have defined restoration as turning everything into a broad-leaved temperate forest. But fortunately, you're asking now, and I know restoration, we cannot talk about it without thinking about users, stakeholders, people, and so on. And that statement fully integrates some of the thinking behind almost all the conversations we've had, thinking about community and governance dynamics, reflecting A-Tree's evolution into a truly interdisciplinary institution. What also makes this product unique is that we have looked at diverse ecosystems and landscapes across India. We span the length and breadth of the country. We look at Karnataka, the Myristica swamps. We've talked about the Tamraparni River in Tamil Nadu. We've looked at the Bunny grasslands, drylands in Gujarat, and so on. And it is this document that's bringing together different socio-ecological contexts and the lessons that they offer. But I would like to emphasize that all of us feel like this is just the beginning. This is merely a documentation of where we are, some of the learnings that we've had, but we recognize that we have a very long way to go. And also something that emerged from the panel, none of us can do it alone. We need to figure out how do we think about some of the systems that we need to impact, some of the other stakeholders we need to talk to, who maybe we are not doing it to the extent that we should. So we have a long way to go on, and on that note, I would like to invite Ms. Rohini Nilekani to unveil the restoration knowledge product.